I grew up hearing that Abbott and Costello hated each other. They couldn't stand each other. This whole thing. Now, I think that's kind of a well-known rumor. But after listening to your book, it sounds to me, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong here, there was a deep love there, but it was like a brotherly love. You had an older brother and a younger brother, two different lives, but they both looked out for each other. They were both there for each other when it came to it. I think it was more of a brotherly type relationship, but an age gap brotherly relationship, if that makes sense. Is that accurate, you think?
It does. And it does. And, the press and the media, from the beginning of time has been so instrumental in trying to put information out there that is just not true. It's based on something that happened, but they put their own twist and spin on it so that readers will be more apt to pay for the magazine, the newspaper, whatever.
Sure.
I go back to what Bob Thomas, the writer of the book Bud and Lou, said to my sister Carol, who passed away in 87, when she contacted him and she was furious. She said, how could you write a book on my dad? How could you be so,
Yeah.
It's not true. Why did you do that? And he very calmly said, and I was in the room, when she was talking to him, and he said, unfortunately, Carol, you don't sell a book by being nice. Well, boom. That's what launched the whole thing for me to do my book, Blues Unversed.
Yeah.
Because I said, you could do a book by being fair. And, it's that seedy part of the entertainment world that I don't care for. A perfect example too is with Robin Williams, just a brilliant, talent. And when he died, I said to somebody, you watch, give it a week or two, and you're going to see on the newsstands at the market, the tabloids, putting some kind of trashy, copy line to get people to buy the magazine. And sure enough, I was right.
Yep.
And somebody called me and said, you were right, Chris, because I was just in the market. And I said, I was too. And, they couldn't wait to get their digs in.
Mm-hmm.
So I always say to people when it comes up about Abbott and Costello not liking each other, I said, look, do you have brothers? Do you have sisters? Have you ever had a fight? Have you ever had a good friend that you had maybe an argument with and you didn't talk to them for a minute or two? We all have. Nobody is exempt from that. And Abbott and Costello first were human beings. Stars second. They had a tremendous, tremendous love for each other. And God help anybody who said anything derogatory about Bud. My dad was fiercely protective of him, and the same thing with Bud towards my dad. They were very much like brothers. They fought like brothers. They loved like brothers. Bud was very much adopted into our family. My grandfather, Dad's dad, absolutely adored this man and called him his third son. The families today are still very close together. My sister and I have frequent lunches with Betty Abbott, Bud Abbott's niece, who was script supervisor, did films like Breakfast at Tiffany's, etc., and started out on Abbott and Costello Meets Frankenstein, and also his great niece, Chrissy Abbott. So I always say you got to just do the math, multiply, divide, subtract. Maybe you'll get a little bit of what is the truth. And so I always try and say, look, did they have arguments? Of course they did. Did they not talk to each other at times? Of course they did. But they always got back together. Betty Abbott said to me, Bud's widow, when I interviewed her, she said, your dad and Bud, they would have a difference of opinion or this or that, and they wouldn't speak to each other. But she said, your mom and I always remained very close friends, and I'll tell you why. We never got involved in their arguments.
Yeah.
She said, we realized that it would blow over, and it did. So I just, people just need to kind of look at their own lives and people in their lives. And of course you're going to have an argument, a disagreement. It's human nature.